Earlier this past week, the nation commemorated the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King on Saturday and his National Day of Honor, Dr. Martin Luther King Day, which we owe a great debt of gratitude to our previous chairman, John Conyers, who labored for that, I think, 15 or 16 years to make it become law on Monday, Dr. Martin Luther King Day. And it was right as a country that we do that. And it was right of John Conyers to initiate the idea and to continue persistently and doggedly to make sure it happened. Many public figures and office holders gave speeches and statements to honor Dr. King's legacy of leadership. And some of them went further to talk about what his leadership was about, to ensure civil rights for all Americans, to make us a better nation. But to truly honor Dr. King, and in the way that I hear in church so often, to paraphrase, be of Dr. King and not just about Dr. King. We must defend the most fundamental right that he fought to secure for Black Americans and other historically oppressed people, the right to vote. Yes, he was for the right to organize and have workers compensated properly and recognized be a part of a union. And he was for health care as a basic civil right, and for peace, and for equitable treatment of all people. But the right to vote was the fundamental linchpin upon which it all rested. In his 1957 speech in May of 1957, he said, quote, "The denial of this sacred right is a tragic betrayal of the highest mandates of our democratic tradition. And so our most urgent request to the President of the United States and every member of Congress is to give us the right to vote. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights." May of 1957, 65 years ago. Distressingly, those words from 1957 apply today, just as aptly as they did the moment that he made the speech, and it does as this moment that we live. As large segments of our nation's political and governing class appear ready to retreat from what had been a longstanding bipartisan commitment to protecting multiracial democracy since the enactment of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's impossible to think of the Voting Rights Act without thinking of our dear colleague, John Lewis, who we all miss greatly. John Lewis, in the first march from Selma, was beaten and almost gave his life for the right to vote. Dr. King led the second march when the government came in and made sure it was successful rather than it was unsuccessful. The people went to Selma with Dr. John Lewis for his moralizations of the march, his memory of the march, and people went and were touched and spoke about it, how they went with John Lewis to Selma. And then some of those same people voted not to continue the Voting Rights Act that he nearly gave his life for. That's named for him, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. As this subcommittee has documented exhaustively through 13 hearings over the course of the last 3 years, voting rights for Black Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, disabled Americans, and other historically disadvantaged groups have once again come under significant threats in many parts of our country. The extensive record we built through those hearings show that many states have adopted laws making absentee voting harder, reducing opportunities for early voting, and closing polling locations at predominantly minority precincts, among other things. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, between January 1 and December 7, 2021, more than 440 bills with provisions that restrict voting access have been introduced in 49 states in the 2021 legislative sessions. These are the most, quote, extraordinary, unquote, numbers that the Brennan Center has seen in any year since it began tracking voting legislation in 2011. Disturbingly, since 2020, we have also seen states changing their election administrative laws and processes to politicize the counting of votes already cast. Vladimir Putin has said it's important, most important, who counts the votes. In some cases, these measures could allow partisan actors to interfere with vote counts or even overturn the results. Beyond these already troubling trends is the fact that this redistricting cycle was the first one without the Voting Rights Act pre-clearance provision in effect. The results were predictable. For example, in Georgia, several lawsuits have been filed challenging the state's new congressional and legislative maps, alleging that they violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act by denying Black voters the equal opportunity to participate in the political process and to elect their candidates of choice by diluting the strength of their voters and their votes. These maps also strip minority elected officials of power by targeting their districts for elimination. In Tennessee, Congressman Cooper's district was divided into 3 different districts, and instead of being a district with 28% minority impact, it now is a district with 12%. And the remaining 16% are scattered through 2 other predominantly rural precincts where there will be 16% Black vote and 10% Black vote. Notably, people of color accounted for all of Georgia's population growth between 2010 and 2020, a time when the state's white population declined. Yet its redistricting plans not only failed to capture this fact, but actively sought to remove minority voters from majority minority districts and place them in the majority white districts. Cracking is what that's called. In Texas, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit to challenge the state's redistricting plans as violations of Section 2 as well. Texas created 2 new majority white congressional districts, eliminated a Latino opportunity district, and failed to create a district capturing the growth of the Latino electorate in Harris County, all despite the fact that 95% of the population growth in Texas between 2010 and 2020 was a result of growth in its minority population. We will hear from our witnesses today about many other examples of how states, besides Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee, have manipulated district lines for federal, state, and local offices to deny voters of color equal opportunity to participate in the political process and elect the candidates of their choice. Make no mistake, at this moment, our nation's democracy stands on the precipice. We can talk all we want about the founding fathers, but they're turning over. We find ourselves in this position not only because of a procedural anachronism in the Senate, but because one of the 2 major political parties has chosen to reverse its historic support for strong voter rights protection. It's instead chosen voter suppression as a political strategy. As recently as 2006, Congress was able to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act by an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote, 98-0 in the Senate. 16 of those senators are still in the Senate, and they didn't vote for the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act this time, and 390-33 in the House, over 10-1. President George W. Bush pushed for the law's passage, and he signed it into law. Now it appears that many on the other side of the aisle have come to the cynical conclusion that it no longer pays politically to protect voting rights. They want power at all costs. The process doesn't matter except how it helps them get power. Indeed, they seem to have come to the conclusion, erroneously in my view, that they can only win if they suppress the right to vote of certain Americans. This is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for our country that some of its leaders have embraced the idea in the year 2022 that true multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy is a threat to them. It is indeed, as Dr. King put it 2 generations ago, a tragic betrayal of the highest mandate of our democratic tradition. We now face an ever-narrowing window to save our democracy. We saw that door shut pretty close in the Senate, where it's 2 votes short of getting an extraordinary process to allow it to continue, and 52 short of the unanimity that it saw in 2006. Let us hope that there's a crack in the door. The light shines in through a crack.